by the end of this anime, I was really enjoying how much it was both well written and well animated, but at the same time it left me with just one thought. What did this add to the overall series? Hello everyone, welcome to the Weebinitiative. I'm your host, the Weeb. This is a show where every other week I'll be talking about anime, manga, and everything in between. This week, following the last few episodes talking about Code Geass, today I will be talking about the one side stories that from what I can gather is actually canon, Code Geass, Akito the Exiled. So before I start, disclaimer, spoiler alert, I'll be talking about everything that happens inside of this anime, even though there are no really big plot twists, because the plot twists are really flagged at the beginning, and for the most part it does not really change much in the way that this series goes. And also, this may be a rather quick review, since this is not something, this is not a series that demands that much in-depth look, or because this effectively, let's say, equates to 10 episodes of an anime, and even then, there are some things that are really rushed, and for that reason, this may not be as long as an episode as normal, so that's that. So let's start with the stats. So Akito the Exiled was a side project, let's say a spin-off of Code Geass, made by the studio Sunrise, the same guys who did the original Code Geass, and also Gundam, later on Love Live, and so on and so forth. And it was released in 5 episodes, all of them are around 50 minutes, from 2012, and here they basically did 1 episode a year, except I think 2014, that 2015 had 2 episodes for some reason. So they started in 2012 and ended in 2016, and so 10 episodes. And this goes through and this is reviewed, let's say, I think in episode 3, when we finally get something that, let's say, resembles the main storyline, in the fact that this happens, the whole of Akito the Exiled happens between the first and the second season of the main anime. So it is, and I already said about the spoilers, easy to say, the one thing that really connects this all is the fact that at some point in this series, Lelouch and Suzaku appear in the middle of this to actually get involved in the whole conflict. So let's start with the story. Akito the Exile is a story centered inside of the Europa continent, the European Union, let's say, against the Euro-Britannia Empire. So basically Britannia has 2, let's say, branches. They have the main branch, that is the Americas, and the guys who basically conquered Japan. And then we have Euro-Britannia, that is the European part of Britannia, that they are basically getting to war with the European Union, who at this point are independent. The thing is, the Euro-Britannia, they are basically, if I'm not mistaken, based out of St. Petersburg, which means around Russia. Don't quote me on that, I'm bad at geography. And the rest of the European Union basically is the independent states. So it's a mix between France, Germany, Great Britain, and the other nations of the, let's say, Central Europe time zone, more or less. And basically, right, so we are thrown already inside of a conflict. So we have our main, let's say, main girl already being shown really at the start. I will pronounce this wrong, Malkau Leila, or Layla, just to be really quick. And she is a commanding officer inside of the European Union Army, but she has a ongoing feud with officer higher than her. And in a moment of basically, I would not say mutiny, but it is the fact that the guy is clearly incompetent at his job, and throwing troops' lives away. She basically disarms the guy and arrests him, takes control of the situation, and makes the current operation that they are doing a success. The thing is, one of the main topics that they bring up at the first episode that they release is that the European Union, since the invasion of Japan, they have been using Japanese youths, Japanese like 18 years old or something like that, as soldiers, as voluntary soldiers, because they are otherwise sent to I don't remember actually the word that they use, to not use the one special word, but let's say they have camps especially for Japanese people, because they are afraid of how Britannia will react if they let the Japanese live normally, because at this point in time they have basically erased Japan out of the map, so there's this whole social stigma around it. And the one thing that happens in here is that we have some Japanese youths being used as troops, but most of them die, and there's only one that returns from this battle, that is Akito, Lieutenant Akito. And for what's worth, he is a really well experienced soldier. The Europeans use a really, I would say, unique design of nightmare that they call the Alexander, which is really something. It's a bit weird when talking about it, but when you see it, you may see it as something kind of innovative, because it is let's say a mecha that goes from the normal human bipedal style to a quadruped, as I would not say necessarily an insect as per se, but it really skitters around and really quickly. It's really interesting the way that they animated it too, because for the most part they use, and this is a thing that I want to talk a bit more later, but it's a thing that they use really well to show off the environmental interaction that they have with these nightmares, which is pretty great in a way of like world building and stuff. Shows the attention to detail. But either way, so we have then Akito and Layla. Akito is our main guy, and basically he returns home after this operation. Layla gets a promotion because she actually turned a fading operation around and actually saved a lot of troops that were in the front lines. So basically the whole idea is that Layla's unit, I think the W0, I think that's the name that they use, is a commando unit. So they have infiltration missions, they have undercover missions, and so on and so forth, to basically try to support the front lines from going into the back lines of the enemies and actually supporting the front lines that way. In that sense, by the end of the operation, we have then the fact that the unit is basically understaffed because they lost a whole lot of soldiers, and now they only have the technical and non-combat staff, meaning that most of them are not even military personnel as per se. So Layla, for instance, is a colonel major, though the rest of her unit are most of them are not really military personnel as per se. Most of them are either scientists or engineers not aligned really with the military, just employed as them. I can see where they draw the line, but either way, it does not really matter by the end of the anime. It doesn't really matter for the plot itself, though it does, let's say, add a bit of tension by the end of it. Anyways, so this is basically the first part, and then we have as the two last, let's say, personnel in the frontline unit. They have Layla and Akito. They have a kind of special moment, even though we learn from a lot of flashbacks and a lot of really weird interactions that Akito is a bit of I will not say psychopath, but he really starts out as the kind of a Joker character because he laughs a lot out of nowhere, and because of killing people and stuff. And also that if you watch the main series at this point, you'll know what the hell this is about. But Akito, whenever he is fighting, he goes into a somewhat of a berserk state, and he seems to be under the effect of a Geass. Not dissimilar to what Suzaku does with Lelouch's command to leave. Akito seems to have a similar kind of state. And then outside of this interaction between Layla and Akito, and also some side stories, some background for Layla herself. Basically, Layla was adopted into a noble family of Europa, and so she's like promised to marry her brother, more or less. It's really weird in that way they would actually access something like that. Whatever. The thing is, outside of that, we have then the presentation of our, that would come later, main guys, who are a group of 3 Japanese, let's say, I will not say kids, but they are also youths in the same like age bracket as both Akito and Layla. They would become part of the unit after this altercation. Ryo, Ayano, and Yukiya. So basically these 3 are a group of orphans that have kind of created a resistance cell inside of Europe to fight the Britannians, even though they are only 3 people. And they try an attempt against I think he's a major. I don't actually remember the general. I don't actually remember his role in the military, but he's basically the father figure for Layla, Eugene Smilas. And so they try to capture / kill him to get better nightmares to fight Britannians, though they are stopped by Akito, because Akito is really skilled and he basically solos 3 guys with really, I will not say rudimentary, but really simple nightmare that he has as security detail, and does I always remember Transformers, the scene of the guy like sliding on his back, shooting out of M32 grenade launcher at the giant robot. It's the same scene, but here animated. And so they fight these guys off, and Layla, instead of killing them, recruit them into W0 squad or Wyvern squad, and so they become her new team. This is basically episode 1, and then we have the flash of Suzaku. It's on whole other area of Europe, traveling with someone who sounds a lot like Lelouch. Later on we will find out that this is actually Lelouch, and this is actually the first attempt at his memory modification by the Emperor. It's really weird and they don't actually dive too much into it, so there's that. Episode 2 is basically the first conflict inside of the team, basically, which is them going into their first mission. So here Akito, Ryo, Ayano, and Yukiya go into an actual battlefield and try to do an actual operation. Though the 3 of them, being rebels as they are, they unironically, after getting the nightmares, try to kill both Akito and Data, and the whole thing kind of becomes a mess. Somehow, somewhere they survive and basically go all out into the I know that you don't like it, but we gotta stick together, because otherwise we all die, and the whole thing. And also, this is where we find the first, let's say, actual opponents for them in the I think it's the Force of Mikael. I don't actually remember the name that they do for the groups, the Order of Mikael, I think. The whole thing is about, and this is a side note, about Euro Britannia that they get really down here, is that Euro Britannians, they take more to the more chivalry side of the nobility system. So different from, let's say, the more modern class systems of what we see in the main story inside of Japan. Here in Europe, they choose to be divided by nobles and stuff, and then there is the general governor that is under the guise of the emperor. So basically they have this whole thing about politics, and the aesthetics of most of the glass codes that we see here, the nightmares that the Britannians use, they have this more chivalry side. So it's really akin to the ones that we see with Cornelia, that they use capes and lances or swords in some cases. And this is the first time where we see an all-out brawl of the Wyvern squad against foreign force, and in the middle of this fight we find out that actually the effect of the Geass that affects Akito and makes him go berserk for one reason or another, that this is something that they don't actually explain whatsoever, but there is a scientist inside of the WO force that is using a kind of a neural implant on all of the troops to measure some kind of cerebral resonance that they all have, because she wants to use this data to wake up her husband that went into a coma due to an experiment years ago. This whole thing is explained in a really quick flashback by the end of the anime, and doesn't actually make any sense, or doesn't actually show what the hell this adds to the overall plot. The one thing that this ends up doing is that they all have less developed telepathy, more or less, so they can actually communicate with their feelings somewhat when inside of their nightmares, and that's more or less it. So basically the whole thing ends up with them kind of winning the fight, though by the end they kind of win the fight, though the main force retreat, and then we get to meet, and this is a whole thing that happens before, but there's this introduction of what will become our main antagonist, that is Hyuga Shin, that later on we find out that it's actually the lost brother of Akito, because Akito is Hyuga Akito, and so they are brothers and stuff, and Akito is the little brother while Shin is the older brother. But Shin he entered Britannia and entered like Britannian forces and was adopted inside of a noble family, and the whole thing kind of goes on from there. He becomes a great knight inside of the Order of Mikhail, but then he, for some reason, I don't actually remember if they actually, I mean, there is the scene where they introduce how they get his gears, but it is so metaphysical in a way. It's so outside of the way that we see other people receive their gears that it doesn't really like make sense inside of the lore of the series, as far as I know. And just to get this over with, right? So Akito's brother, Shin, he has a Geass. It is somewhat similar and not really the same as Lelouch's, and he's the one that basically implanted the berserk mode inside of Akito, and for one reason or another he wants to kill Akito no matter what. And to that, the fact that he has through using his Geass ascended into being the commander of the Order of Mikhail, and the whole thing goes from there, right? So then he fights Akito for the first time, but then everybody stops him, and then we go home, everybody retreats, and then the second episode ends. The third episode is one of the most baffling things that I watched and thought, like, what the hell am I really here for, right? So the third episode, it first starts with the fact that after the guys have basically defeated the main force of the Order of Mikhail, and then Shin appears and gives his villain speech and shows off and doesn't kill anyone. There is a part where everybody's nightmares inside of the Wyvern squad are depleted, and basically they need to wait inside of one of the garrisons from the army, away from their main base, because their main base is in what would be Germany, and I think they are on Prague. I may be wrong on that, don't quote me on that, or maybe actually Warsaw, Poland. And the whole thing is that the guy that Layla at the beginning of the anime basically demotes, he fucks their register their IDs, and so they are basically locked out of the garrison because they are not they basically delete their IDs, so they are not military personnel anymore. They don't have credit, don't have money and stuff, and by a whole lot of tomfoolery they get involved with a group of gypsies. They're all women. I don't know, I would say gypsy group would be a whole like family unit thing, but anyways, so they get involved with this gypsy group, and then we have the whole, let's say, team building kind of arc inside of this one episode, and then they have this whole arc. It's really like cute, really dumb stuff. We find out the insecurities of Leila because she can be really great on military affairs and stuff. She's really diligent with all of her tasks, though she has no skills whatsoever when it comes to housework and cooking and stuff. And so she feels kind of useless because she can't help, and the whole this is a whole arc that everybody and their mother has seen already, but it is kind of cute. I think Leila is a really nice character overall. She encapsulates a lot of the great characteristics that you would like on the main girl, so there's that. She's really cute. Outside of that, so the whole thing goes from there. They have this whole arc until one point where Yukiya somehow somewhere he gets a supercomputer, somehow somewhere downloading more RAM with another computer, don't ask me how, and then he basically recovers their IDs and fucks up the guy again, and in fucking up the guy he gets their stuff back, and they go back home. Aside from that, we have a shot inside of the Euro Britannia kind of headquarters where Suzaku is with the guy who sounds like Lelouch and Shin, now that Shin has unabashedly ascended to the High Master. I don't actually remember the titles for this shit, but he's the leader of now the Mikai War, and so he has he's one of the most powerful individuals inside of the Euro-Britannia Empire. With that said, the guy who sounds like Lelouch, he is called Julius Kingsley, who I would think that this surname is really way too on the nose. I think Kingsley, really, for Lelouch. Anyways, so the guy sounds like Lelouch. I was not really certain at some point, though he has like mental breakdowns sometimes, and one of those unfortunate times was when he was playing chess with Shin, and he kind of starts breaking down and says some stuff, mentions Nanari and stuff, and then you basically confirm, oh right, so this is memory overwritten Lelouch, and then this is a whole fuckery around the Emperor, so this is between the first and second season. Yes, that's basically what the hell this is. So much so that at the very beginning you see that Suzaku still has the impetus he has the urge to actually strangle Lelouch because of what he did. I mean, if you remember the first season, you would say, yeah, I would still hold a grudge by it. And in a way, this kind of, I'm giving more credit to the anime than I think it's due, but they kind of write a convenient way to say that Suzaku is learning to live with the fact that Lelouch may have killed Yuffie and not actually wanting to kill him outright. At the very least, he has become a bit more tolerant of him at this point in time. Later on the second season, we'll debate that point, but still. And so this happens in this third episode, and also we have another cut to General Smiles that he has a connection with a girl who I don't know who she is, I don't know her name, I don't know if one of the movies actually talks about her, but I don't know. And she makes it seem like she is, let's say, an agent of the Geass, somewhat, and basically she comes out of nowhere to basically warn Smiles that if he doesn't kill Shin, he specifically doesn't kill Shin, she will somehow get him killed. And this is an actual threat because she's like supernatural kind of witch and stuff. And then the whole thing kind of goes like that, and the episode basically ends. Also, by the end of the third episode, we have the introduction of after Lelouch basically recomposes himself, he stages a somewhat coup d'etat inside of Euro Britain to actually take control over all their stuff, and he follows up with a plan that only Lelouch could think of. He basically bluffs his way into making their European people riot against their government, even though they are already in the middle of a war. So the whole thing kind of blows out really badly. It's really interesting to see how quickly things escalate. It gives a really weird sense of timing for the whole thing, because it really does seem like someone just read a headline, just decided to burn tires and break stuff like instantaneously. It's really funny that way. I think that the anime may have benefited. Oh my god, what was that? I'm having a stroke. They may have taken advantage of a better timing if they could have not rushed the whole thing, but still. Then the whole thing goes in a way that there is this whole propaganda against the government because they fake an explosion of a power plant even though the explosion doesn't actually happen. And then the idea is that they would fake, the Euro-Britannian guys would fake having a aero carrier basically for a whole lot of nightmares and attack civilian cities, but then the Wyvern squad is tasked with intercepting the whole thing, and they not being as versed with fear tactics and stuff, they don't actually understand that this is an attempt to actually bluff and the whole thing is kind of a scam. And so they are led into a trap. The guy who appeared in the second episode, Ashley, who is one of the main knights inside of the Order of Mikhail, goes there, and this is a special shout out to the guys who did the sound on this. He comes out with a nightmare who has six miniguns, not really miniguns, it's straight up an artillery. And the one, oh my god, this was awesome. When I watched this, I started to giggle so hard because it's the exact sound of what they use inside of video games of an A10 Warthog, but clearly the barrels don't move in the same speed as an A10, and it felt so funny to me because the sound was just, oh my god, this is an A10, but it was not. It was a fucking mech. Like, what the fuck am I watching? And the mech has 3 guns in each hand. Like, what the fuck? Oh my god. Well, me geeking out aside, the whole thing goes down in a way that Akito starts going berserk, but then after we had our therapy session with the group, everyone else stops him from killing the guy, and then Ashley basically becomes an impromptu ally from that point forward, because he gets the vibe, he gets the idea, because the whole place where they are, this is a barge in the middle of the air. The whole thing kind of starts to explode, and he didn't actually know that this was meant to explode, and so he got the idea that he was letting into a trap for himself. He was serving as bait to try to kill everyone else, and so they kind of get caught in that, and the whole thing kind of goes in a way that everybody inside of the HQ is kind of bummed and really down bad, they're really sad because they think that everybody else died, and the whole thing kind of goes from there. And while this is happening, also they kind of push Layla to make an announcement to try to rile the people from Europa to actually fight, and the whole thing kind of really blows out of proportion in that sense, because now everybody's sad because everyone in the squad died, and at the same time Leila has to do this even though she's like crying a lot. And then we have a side cut to Shin kind of guessing his adoptive mother and little sister into committing Sudoku out of nowhere without context, and the whole thing kind of becomes like, what the fuck am I watching? Then we find out that Shin is trying to invade, he somehow discovered the location of the main base of the Wyvern Squad. He tries to invade that, but they defend, and then we have this intermission where he has not flashbacks, but he has like hauntings from the ghosts of everyone that he killed, and then the whole thing kind of goes in a weird direction where for some reason somewhere not really explained, we had the second in command inside of the main base. I think it was Commander Warwick. I think it's Warwick. Quite cute League of Legends reference there. He was actually a mole because he was receiving money to actually treat his kid, even though we never actually see his kid. And the whole thing kind of, he had like ulterior motives, whatever. And so he was selling information from inside to the Britannians to actually do that. And while this is happening, we find out that also Ismailas was also in cahoots with Britannia to actually take over the government and do a communist revolution somewhat. It's really weird, and a lot of things happen like at once. And then by the end of the episode, we have this situation where Warwick, although he's a motherfucker who sold information, was a mole and the whole thing, he wants to make Layla surrender so they won't kill everyone inside of the castle. The castle is the base that they live in. It's the base of the castle. What do you want? And the whole thing kind of goes in a way that Warwick kind of grows a heart of nowhere, even though till that point we never actually seen him be such an ass. But at the moment that he talks about how he betrayed everybody, he becomes an ass, but he's not really an ass because we don't actually see him as a motherfucker, even though he is. The whole thing kind of becomes really weird. And the thing is, right, so he goes with Layla to surrender in person in front of Shin, and at the last moment Shin actually tries to Geass Layla, but Layla somehow I would say reflects the Geass. And then we have a flashback that when she was little, when her parents died by a terrorist attack, she somehow, somewhere met with what would be C2, which in and of itself is a timeline inconsistency, because given that everybody when I say this is Layla, Akito, Ludushu and Suzaku, given that they are all inside of the same age bracket, and then we look at someone like Mao from the first season, Mao was not really that older than the rest of the guys there, and given that they would be kids all at the same time, if C2's flashbacks of Mao inside of the first season are correct, then Mao as a kid had C2 all for him and in China, whereas it's pretty clear that wherever Layla found C2, it was on Europe and inside of the time frame, so it doesn't really make sense the fact that she met C2 even though C2 was on China at the time. That's basically what I'm trying to say, and the whole thing kind of goes from there. She has somehow a kind of Geass or reverse Geass, something of the kind, and she has connections to the Geass group, Geass powers and stuff. He reflects Shin. Shin becomes infuriated by it and orders everybody to die. And in the last moment, Akito, Ryu, Ayano, and Ayano come flying down to rescue her. Akito rescues her and stuff, while also we find out that they are carrying Ashley as now a full-on ally, and also the fact that they are somehow driving the air barge that was the bait, and somehow somewhere Yukiya stays in the barge last to actually attack some of the Britannian troops that were stationed outside of the castle, though this doesn't actually become clear at first, only after some Britannian soldiers mention the fact that they received an attack out of nowhere from the air that implies that it was Yukiya, and they don't actually show any of the scenes of him actually attacking. That's the thing. And then when he falls, the whole thing explodes. He has to be rescued and goes through surgery to actually live. And then we have the semi-introduction of another side character that's friends with the scientist that is doing the tests around neural implants and the brain resonance and stuff, and the whole thing kind of really becomes messy at this point. And basically, right, this is the end of episode 4, when basically everybody's back home, but now Layla has been declared dead by Smiles. Shin's about to invade the castle and do really bad stuff, and everybody's kind of bummed out because the whole thing kind of is going to blow. Now when we get to the 5th episode, we have all-out war, really. The invasion begins, the whole thing kind of goes in a whole way. So at this point, Shin has killed everyone else inside of the other orders. So inside of so each of the orders are named as Archangel. So it's Mikhail, Raphael, Uriel, and I don't actually remember the last one. Sorry, but with those things, he has basically killed 2 of them and taken over power for them. He throws a whole lot of guys who are disloyal to him as a canon fodder. Basically, the whole episode is a huge animation of mecha fights with a few plot points sprinkled in from the, let's say, unrequited love of Shin actually growing, like developing this thinking like, yeah, I'm following him into doing this a really suicidal plan to destroy everything, but maybe I shouldn't, and I should save him. Then we have Yukia coming really late because he was out for 7 days and basically he just woke up to fight. Then we have Ashley with a new nightmare fighting against the Britannians. The whole inside of the bridge of the main command center, all the guys discussing and trying to defend themselves and exploding walls, activating turrets and stuff. And then we get to the part where the whole thing goes way too metaphysical for me. So there's this one part where Akito and Shin are fighting inside of their nightmares, and somehow through the convergence of Geass, let's say, they basically vanish and start fighting inside of a pocket dimension, while we see the flashbacks of Shin and how he killed everyone in his family and got his Geass because of a skull that appeared after he killed his father. Don't ask me how, that's just a scene. And this kind of tries to explain the idea of why he wants to destroy everything. And outside of that, we have this part that is really just what the hell is even happening, while there are Britannian soldiers invading the command center. And when they enter, and again, nobody there, like 2 people inside of 2 people of like, I don't know, 16 people are actual military personnel. The rest is all civilians. The guys burst into there and just start blasting. Everybody dies. It's a really gruesome scene to remind you that you're actually watching Code Geass, where you can't only have the good mecha fights, you also need to have some scenes to really question your credibility on humanity, and this is one of such of them. Add to that the fact that they basically, right, so everybody dies, and when they die, when the whole thing kind of sinks in for Layla, when Warwick has basically jumped in front of her to protect her, her Geass kind of activates, and the girl who threatened Smiles appears and says, oh, I will give you another chance just because your desire is so cute and stuff. I'm paraphrasing, but you know what I mean. And basically they had a hard reset, like she just snapped it and we went back in time somewhat. And so this gives Layla the chance to actually react to the attack and don't actually let the guys burst in outright. And at the point where they're about to burst in, she lowers bulkheads and stuff and talks with the guys like, okay, we are getting out, we don't want to fight, there's no military personnel armed here, just please don't kill everybody here. And so they destroy the command center. Shin and Akito somehow get out of the pocket dimension, continue fighting until the point that their nightmares are spent, and so they keep on fighting. So at this point, Akito has it's not exactly a kodachi, but it's a small katana that he borrowed from Ayano, and Shin always carries a full-length katana, and so they fight a lot and start fighting until a point that Akito is nearly losing. Though at the last moment, Jane, who's the unrequited love of Shin, comes up, shoots him, gets stabbed in exchange, defending Akito, and then both of them die. And then in his last moments, Shin has the revelation that, yeah, I should have maybe done things a bit differently, and then he dies holding Jan's hand and so on and so forth. Then the ending is basically this is the end of the main story, let's say. Then the actual ending is somehow actually coming out to save his group again, and killing Ismailas in the process as retribution of the Geass girl. She basically comes to Ismailas and says, oh, you failed, you didn't kill Shin, so now you die. And then Ashley just comes, not that she demanded it from Ashley to actually kill Silas, but in the fact that she basically the idea is that she controlled fate in the way that he would end up dying. It's more like I somewhat guided the guy in the nightmare to come here, but not really that I directly told him to. And Silas Smilas ends up dying, and then the rest of the guys, who everybody stayed together and nobody died, everybody goes and joins up with the gypsy grandmas that we had on episode 3, and they live happily ever after ? Then after that we have let's say after credit scene where Lolo from the second season comes to rescue Suzaku and Lelouch, who were at this point imprisoned by Shin, who had taken all the control inside of Euro-Britannia. And that's basically the end of Akito the Exiled. Whether this was a happy ending or not, it depends on the viewer, really. I don't think that it is, because ultimately it's really a cop-out. I know that they were all declared dead, but at the same time, the ending kind of fucks me up. Like, what the fuck what was that, right? So what was the ending, really? And not only that, but the whole thing kind of feels really rushed. There are some scenes that we need to get context from the scene after, because some stuff doesn't actually make sense. And when we join up things as they tell us, it kind of does. The one that really jumps out to me and really gets me like really mad is the Yukia one, because there's no clear scene where Yukia is actually raining down death from up above against the Britannians, even though the Britannians say they lost a lot of troops because there was a sniper floating in the sky. And this is kind of a symptom that's I think greater than the whole thing. Capping all of these episodes to 1 hour is in of itself a limitation that they had in introducing this anime, but also I think that they could have used a bit more time just to develop some stuff more. I think that for the most part the first 3 episodes are quite a bit insufferable. The only real time where I think this anime really went off really well was after the group was an actual group, though I think that's part of the idea. But at the same time, I think that the story itself doesn't actually add up too much to the overall story of Code Geass. It doesn't really make that much sense, and for one, I don't actually remember on top of my head if there was any actual reference to something of this happening inside of the second season. I don't know if in the movies they changed it so there is a reference to this, but given that this may as well be inside of the original timeline, the canon timeline, there's no real harm in saying that this is inside of the canon timeline. The only thing that I would add is that this does not add, ironically enough, anything to the whole story. And in that, I don't think that this anime is that great in doing the work of actually telling a story that changes something inside of the whole series. Though, and this is the main thing, there are two things that really get me going on this anime. The first is every single one of the episodes, without fail, they have at the release one great scene of mechas fighting. And okay, 3D, whatever, I know I have really strong stance when talking about 3D in anime. I don't like it, that's okay. But I think, and I need to actually be honest here, I think that they did a really great job. I don't think that they would have had a great result with what they did if it was 2D unless they worked really hard on it. I mean, some of the things, and this is one thing that I mentioned at the beginning, the Alexanders have this whole like gimmick of becoming quadruped at the touch of a button, and they skitter around more than actually, like, I don't know, move around like a dog or a horse and stuff. And they really feel like insects, something really quick, so really nimble, really agile. And I don't think that they would have had such a great result with 2D animation unless they actually had a whole lot of more people to actually animate that. In saying that, I have to say that the 3D is actually pretty good inside of all the battles. I think that they did a really great job. I think also that they did an okay job inside of the backgrounds, not in the way that the backgrounds are really well made, but in the fact that they could hide the less detailed background inside of scenes so well choreographed and inside of scenes so well animated in their own right. I think that for the most part, all of the fight scenes are really well choreographed, well animated, well done, in the way that they all have this real like weight to them, the whole thing, the whole movement, especially. And this is a thing that I have not mentioned until this point, but it is something that really just got me like, oh my god, this is so over the top, it's so nice. Shin's nightmare especially is a centaur with a really strange lens that has a lot of cogs, a whole lot of moving parts and blades and stuff. It is such a wonderful sight to see something like that animated, because it's so over the top, so unnecessary to actually have that amount of detail, but they still went out of their way to do it. And aside from that, also his ranged attack is a fucking lever action. It's really interesting to see something like that. The style is really nice, and the animations that they use, they are pretty nice too. Which then leads me to the second thing. For the most part, the soundtrack for this whole thing is really nice, and especially when they fight. Specific fights, they're not like all of the fights, but some specific ones, they have this jazz track that just came out straight out of Cowboy Bebop. It is so interesting, because I swear this was straight out of Bebop, because for those who don't know or don't remember, Sunrise are the same guys who did Cowboy Bebop, so I wouldn't like put it past them, but I don't think it is necessarily that. But the jazz inside of the fight, oh my god, man, so it feels nostalgic. Even though I talked about Bebop like 1-2 months ago, it feels nostalgic. It feels like it's something that I really wanted to see again, and it feels well. It's really nice. It matches well with how frenetic the movements are, especially Akito's way of fighting, especially when he's in Berserk. Oh my god, the animation is really well done to 3D. And I mean, that's basically the whole conclusion about this anime, is that animation is great, the story is somewhat okay, but inside of the whole picture of Code Geass, I don't actually know if they needed to do it, I'd say. And so that's about it. So before I keep on rambling, thank you guys for listening, thank you guys for watching. Please like, please share, please follow, depending on the platform you're in. And I hope you stick around for next time. Bye.